An old man in torn clothes walked toward the gates of a powerful general's funeral, but the guards stopped him. They refused to let him in, calling him a stranger. No one knew who he was, until four-star general arrived, halted everything, and revealed the shocking truth that silenced the entire crowd. Welcome to Brainfuel, the channel where real stories of loyalty, sacrifice, and humanity come to life. Here, every video brings you lessons that inspire, moments that touch your heart, and stories you'll never forget. Don't just watch, feel the story. Subscribe now and let's fuel your mind together. The morning sky hung heavy with gray clouds, as if even the heavens mourned the loss of General Marcus Hill. His funeral was not just another ceremony. It was a national event. Roads leading to the military cemetery were sealed off, with soldiers posted every few feet. Black cars lined the street, carrying high-ranking officers, politicians, and family members. The faint sound of military band practicing echoed in the distance, slow and somber. At the gates of the cemetery, security was tight. Uniformed guards checked invitations, scanned ID cards, and directed guests into a carefully organized line. Every step of the ceremony had been planned, every detail precise, just as General Hill himself would have wanted. People whispered among themselves as they waited to enter. Some recalled his legendary victories on the battlefield, others his reputation for kindness toward his men. Stories of his courage seemed to float in the air like smoke from a fading fire. For many, attending this funeral was not just about respect. It was about being part of history. And then, just as the line moved forward, something unusual happened. An old man appeared at the edge of the crowd. He walked slowly, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. His clothes were not neat and pressed like the polished suits and uniforms around him. Instead, he wore a coat that looked decades old, its color faded and buttons loose. His shoes were scuffed, the leather cracked with age. His hat was tilted awkwardly on his head, as if he had pulled it out of a closet at the last moment. Unlike the others who carried crisp invitation letters or official passes, the old man clutched nothing but the cane in one hand and a small envelope in the other. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, each one a story etched by time. His back was slightly bent, but his eyes, though tired, burned with a quiet determination. As he approached the guarded entrance, one soldier stepped forward, blocking his path. "Sir, I need to see your invitation." The old man raised his head slowly. His voice, though weak, carried a weight that caught the guard off guard. "I need to be there," he said. "Please let me in." The guard frowned. He had seen plenty of mourners already that morning, but this man was different. He didn't look like an official, a family member, or a military officer. In fact, he looked like someone who didn't belong at such a prestigious event at all. "I'm sorry, sir," the guard replied firmly. "This funeral is restricted to invited guests and military personnel. You'll need to step aside." The old man's grip on his cane tightened. His lips trembled for a moment before he spoke again. "I came here for him. I came for Marcus." The guard glanced at his partner, confused. He tried to keep his tone professional. "Sir, I understand, but the rules are very clear. Without proper clearance, we cannot let you in." But the old man didn't move. Instead, he took one small step closer to the gate. The shuffle of his worn shoes against the pavement made people in the line turn their heads. Whispers began to spread among the mourners. "Who is he?" one woman muttered. "He doesn't look like a general," another whispered. "Maybe he's lost," someone else suggested. The guards shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to creating scenes during a ceremony this important. Their job was to keep everything smooth and respectful. And yet here was this stranger, stubbornly refusing to walk away. "I just need a moment inside," the old man said again, his voice softer this time, almost like a plea. "Just a moment to say goodbye." One guard sighed, his patience thinning. "Sir, please don't make this difficult. This is not the place for outsiders." That word, outsiders, seemed to strike the old man. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes glistened, but he held back his tears. Slowly, he lifted the envelope in his hand. The paper was yellowed, edges worn, as though it had been carried for decades. "This," he said, his voice cracking, "this is my proof." The guard leaned forward, glancing at the envelope. It looked old, fragile, almost ready to crumble. The guard shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir. That doesn't look official. Please step aside." The old man lowered the envelope, clutching it to his chest as if it were the most valuable thing he owned. His cane shook slightly under his weight, but his feet remained planted. He would not leave. The whispers among the mourners grew louder. Some were annoyed that the line was being delayed. Others were curious, watching with pity or interest. One man in a suit muttered, "Why don't they just let him in? He's just an old man." But rules were rules, and the guards had been given strict orders. No exceptions. The old man's breathing grew heavier, his chest rising and falling. His eyes flickered toward the cemetery gates, where he could just make out the rows of chairs, the draped casket, the fluttering flag. His voice broke as he whispered, almost to himself, "I can't let him down. Not today." The guards exchanged nervous glances. Something about the man's words carried a weight they couldn't quite understand. He wasn't demanding entry like a protester or begging like someone desperate for attention. His tone was different, filled with sorrow, but also with honor. Still, they had their orders. And so, one guard stepped closer, his hand resting near his belt as a sign of authority. "Sir, I'll ask you one last time. Please leave." The old man didn't move. His eyes, filled with years of memories, stayed locked on the casket in the distance. His silence was louder than words. And just like that, the tension hung thick in the air. The crowd was watching. The guards were firm. And the old man stood his ground, fragile yet unshakable. He wasn't just another mourner. He was someone with a story, a promise, and a reason to be there, reasons that the guards and everyone else were about to learn. The line outside the cemetery gates moved slowly, yet every eye was now drawn to the frail figure standing stubbornly before the guards. Whispers rippled through the mourners like waves across a quiet lake. Nobody knew who he was, but everyone could sense this wasn't just some random misunderstanding. There was something different about the way he stood, the way he refused to move, the way his eyes clung to the side of the flag-draped casket in the distance. "Sir," the guard repeated, his voice sharper than before, "this is a restricted ceremony. I've already told you. Family, officials, and invited personnel only. You cannot go in without proper clearance." The old man's breathing grew heavy. His frail hand gripped the cane, knuckles turning white. His eyes lifted slowly, meeting the guards. Though clouded with age, his gaze was steady. His words came softly, but they carried a strength that made the guard pause. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "I just need a few moments inside, just enough to say goodbye." Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, tore between sympathy and curiosity. A young boy whispered to his father, "Why won't they let him in?" He looked so sad. The father hushed him, but even he couldn't take his eyes off the old man. The second guard, taller and sterner, stepped forward. "Do you have an invitation letter? An ID? Anything official?" The old man's hand trembled as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out the same small, faded envelope he had shown before. Its edges were torn, its color yellow with age. He opened it slowly, revealing a folded letter inside. The ink was smudged in places, as though it had been handled hundreds of times. "This," he said quietly, holding it out with care, "this is all I have." The guard barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "Sir, this isn't valid. It looks old. It doesn't prove anything. You can't enter." The old man's lips quivered. His hand lowered, clutching the letter to his chest as if it were a lifeline. His voice cracked, but his words were clear. "It proves everything. It's from Marcus himself." The taller guard sighed, clearly growing impatient. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but this funeral is for dignitaries and family. We cannot just let random people inside because they show us an old piece of paper. Please, step aside before we have to escort you away." The word escort stung like a slap. The old man's body shook, not out of fear, but out of insult. He pressed the letter tightly against his chest, his other hand gripping the cane with all the strength his frail body had left. He whispered again, his voice low but firm. "I fought beside him. I bled beside him. If anyone belongs here, it's me." Gasps rose from the crowd. The guards froze, stunned by the sudden revelation. The murmurs grew louder. Did he say he fought with General Hill? Someone asked. That can't be right. He looks too old. No! Another corrected. That makes sense. Hill served decades ago. This man might actually be telling the truth. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Neither of them had the authority to make such a call. Letting in someone without clearance could mean severe consequences. Yet, the way the old man spoke, so steady, so unwavering, made it hard to dismiss him as a liar. The taller guard tried again, softening his tone this time. Sir, if what you're saying is true, then I respect that. But we have procedures. We can't let you in without approval. Please understand. There are high-ranking officials inside. This is a state-level event. We cannot take risks. The old man's eyes watered. He shook his head slowly. All I ask is to keep a promise. He saved me once. Saved my life when no one else could. I swore I would stand at his side, whether in life or in death. And now this is my last chance. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the crowd of mourners seemed to hold their breath. His words had cut deeper than anyone expected. But rules were rules. The guard stiffened again, retreating into the safety of protocol. Sir, the first guard said, his voice gentler but still firm, I'm sorry. I really am, but I cannot allow you through. The old man's shoulders sagged under the weight of rejection. His head bowed, but his feet refused to move. His cane shook slightly as he leaned against it, but he did not step back. One mourner, an older woman in a black dress, whispered loudly enough for others to hear. For heaven's sake, just let him in. He's no threat. Another voice chimed in. Yes, what harm could it do? He clearly knew the general. But the guards could not bend the rules because of sympathy alone. They had been trained to resist such pressure, and yet even they couldn't deny the growing unease in their hearts. Something about this man felt real, too real to ignore. The taller guard placed a firm hand on the old man's arm, intending to gently guide him away. But the old man stiffened and spoke again, his voice suddenly stronger, filled with years of buried pride. I was there when Marcus faced fire, so fierce it turned night into day. I was there when he carried men on his shoulders, bleeding, refusing to give up. And I was there when he told me, if I go before you, promise me you'll be there at the end. That's what this is about. Not rules, not invitations. A promise. The crowd fell utterly silent. Even the guards froze, their grip loosening. The weight of his words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. The old man's chest heaved as he steadied himself. His voice dropped to a whisper. I can't break that promise. Not today. Not ever. And with that, the standoff deepened. The guards, caught between duty and conscience, didn't know what to do. The crowd, torn between order and compassion, waited for someone, anyone, to make a decision. The old man stood his ground, fragile but unyielding, a living shadow of the general whose funeral was taking place. And though he hadn't been allowed past the gate yet, one truth was becoming clear to everyone watching. This was not the story of a stranger forcing his way into a ceremony. This was a story of loyalty, brotherhood, and a bond forged in the fire of war. And soon, the entire funeral would come to a halt because of him. Inside the cemetery, the funeral was unfolding with the precision of a military operation. Rows of white chairs had been set neatly on the green lawn, facing the center where a casket rested beneath a massive canopy. The casket itself was a symbol of honor, draped in the nation's flag, polished to a shine, and surrounded by flowers carefully chosen in the general's favorite colors. At the front row sat the general's family. His wife, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses, clutched a handkerchief that was already damp with tears. Beside her, their grown children sat in silence, their expressions a mix of grief and pride. Military leaders filled the next rows, their uniforms heavy with medals that gleamed even under the overcast sky. Beyond them, dignitaries, officials, and carefully selected guests formed a sea of solemn faces. The atmosphere was heavy, the kind that pressed on people's chests and made them speak in whispers if they spoke at all. The military band played slowly, each note lingering in the air, pulling the crowd deeper into mourning. Yet, outside the gate, another scene was unfolding. The old man still stood before the guards, his frail figure dwarfed by the tall iron gates that separate him from the ceremony. His eyes strained to see through the bars, to catch every glimpse he could of the event he wasn't allowed to join. Each note of the band reached his ears like a reminder of what he was being denied. The first speeches began inside. A younger officer stepped forward to the podium, his voice strong yet wavering with emotion. Today, we gather not only to mourn the loss of General Marcus Hill, but to celebrate a man whose life was devoted to service. Applause followed, though soft and respectful. Heads nodded, tears were wiped away, and the general's legacy was honored with every word. The old man outside clutched the bars of the gate with one hand, his knuckles pale. His cane leaned against his leg, momentarily forgotten. He whispered to himself, words no one else could hear. He wouldn't want me out here. He'd want me beside him. The guards noticed his grip tightening, his body trembling with emotion. The taller one stepped closer, lowering his voice so the onlookers wouldn't hear. Sir, please, don't make this harder than it already is. For you, for us, for everyone. The old man's eyes didn't leave the casket in the distance. His voice, though cracked, was firm. Hard? You think standing here is hard? Hard was the night Marcus, and I thought we wouldn't see the sunrise. Hard was watching men fall, and still pushing forward because he told us we must. This, he tapped his cane on the ground. This is not hard. This is a promise I will not break. The guards swallowed hard. For the first time, doubt filled his posture. The man didn't sound like a liar. He sounded like someone carrying decades of memories, of pain, of loyalty. Inside the cemetery, the ceremony continued. A chaplain read verses, his voice echoing gently across the field. Soldiers stood in perfect formation, rifles gleaming at their sides, ready for the ceremonial salute. Every detail was flawless, a final tribute to a man who had lived his life with discipline and honor. But outside, the whispers grew louder among the crowd still waiting to enter. If he really fought with a general, why don't they let him in? One woman asked. Maybe they think he's lying, another replied. But look at him. He doesn't look like someone making up stories. He looks broken. The old man's hands trembled as he pulled the faded letter from his coat once more. He pressed it against his chest, holding it like a sacred relic. His lips moved again, quietly reciting the words he had read so many times before. Samuel, if the day comes when I am laid to rest, I hope you'll be there. I would not have survived that night without you. I owe you my life, and I would be honored if you stood at my funeral. Marcus. He closed his eyes, clutching the letter tightly. His voice broke into a whisper. And here I am, Marcus, but they won't let me in. One mourner in the line, an elderly woman with tears streaming down her face, approached the guards. Let him in, she said softly but firmly. You can see it means everything to him. The guards hesitated. Their orders were strict. This funeral was for the most powerful and respected individuals. Allowing an unverified man could cost them their careers, or worse. Yet something about the way he stood there, fragile but unshakable, made them second-guess the rules they had sworn to uphold. The taller guard finally spoke again, his voice almost pleading. Sir, I need you to understand. This is bigger than us. If you force your way in, you'll be removed. I don't want that to happen. The old man turned slowly, his eyes glassy but fierce. I'm not forcing my way in. I'm asking, begging if I must, not for myself but for him. Inside, the chaplain's words shifted to remembrance. General Hill was more than a leader. He was a brother, a father, a friend to those who fought beside him. His courage on the battlefield inspired men to keep going when hope was lost. The old man's lips curled into a sad smile. He whispered to himself, yes, that's who he was. The man who pulled me out of the dirt when I couldn't stand anymore. The man who told me, don't give up, Carter. We're going home together. The ceremony inside painted the general as a legend, but outside, the old man carried the truth of that legend in his heart, raw and unpolished. He didn't see Marcus Hill as just a 4-star general or a national hero. He saw him as a friend who once saved his life in a muddy trench when survival seemed impossible. The divide between the two worlds, the polished honor inside and the raw loyalty outside, was growing sharper with every passing moment. The guards felt it. The crowd felt it. And soon, the entire funeral would be forced to face it. The old man's voice trembled, but carried enough strength for those closest to hear. I made him a promise. And promises, gentlemen, are sacred. And though the funeral continued smoothly within the cemetery walls, something was shifting outside. The guards' confidence wavered. The mourners' whispers grew into murmurs of support. The old man's quiet defiance was turning into something greater, something no one could ignore. It was no longer a simple standoff. It was a test of rules versus honor, of duty versus compassion, of what it truly meant to respect the legacy of the man they were there to bury. And that test was only just beginning. The ceremony inside pressed on, each speech in him echoing across the cemetery grounds. Yet outside the gates, the tension had reached a breaking point. The old man still stood firm, gripping his cane in one hand and the faded envelope in the other. His back ached, his knees trembled, but his spirit would not bend. The guards, trapped between duty and compassion, continued to block him. Then came the sound that changed everything. The sudden growl of an engine, followed by the screech of tires halting on the gravel road. Heads turned as a sleek black car, draped discreetly with small military flags, rolled to a stop just a few feet away. The doors opened with a deliberate, heavy motion, and out stepped a figure who instantly commanded the air around him, General Roberts. The crowd murmured in recognition. He was one of the highest-ranking officers alive, a 4-star general whose very presence demanded respect. Stories of his brilliance and toughness had traveled through military camps and political halls alike. He was known for his iron discipline, his sharp judgment, and above all, his loyalty to the code of honor. The guards at the gate stiffened instantly, snapping to attention with a crisp salute. Their spines straightened, their chests puffed out, as though the mere sight of him had electrified their training. General Roberts didn't return the salute immediately. His sharp eyes swept across the scene, the murmuring crowd, the rigid guards, and finally, the frail old man standing defiantly at the gate. There was something in Robert's expression that shifted almost immediately from formality to curiosity. He strode forward, his boots striking the pavement in a steady rhythm that silenced even the whispers around him. "What's happening here?" His voice was calm but edged with authority, the kind that could make even seasoned soldiers feel like nervous recruits again. The first guard cleared his throat, speaking carefully. "Sir, this man is trying to gain entry without proper clearance. He says he knew General Hill, but we've seen no valid documentation. We were following protocol." Robert's gaze lingered on the old man. He studied him, his weathered face, the trembling hands, the faded coat that hung loosely over his fragile frame. But it wasn't weakness Robert saw. It was something deeper, something heavy with history. He took a step closer. "What's your name, soldier?" The old man straightened as best he could. Though his back remained slightly bent, his voice steadied. "Private Samuel Carter, 101st Division, retired." He paused, as though the memories themselves weighed on him. "I was with Marcus on the night we thought we wouldn't see dawn." The crowd went still. The guards blinked, their confidence faltering. Samuel's eyes glistened as he went on. "He saved me that night, pulled me out when I thought it was over. And I swore with everything I had, that if he left this world before me, I would stand at his funeral, no matter what." A hush fell so complete that even the distant music from inside the cemetery seemed to fade. General Roberts' face softened, though his posture remained upright. Slowly, almost ceremoniously, he raised his right hand and delivered a sharp salute directly to the old man. Gasps echoed from the crowd. A 4-star general, one of the most powerful men in uniform, saluting a forgotten private. "Private Carter," Roberts said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of both respect and revelation. "General Hill spoke of you often, more times than I can count. He said you were one of the bravest men he ever had the honor to fight beside." The guards' eyes widened, their jaws clenched with embarrassment. They had been seconds away from dragging this man away, and yet here stood their commanding officer, paying him the highest respect. Roberts turned sharply to the guards. "Stand down." His tone left no room for hesitation. "Yes, sir." The guards replied instantly, stepping aside with rigid precision. But Roberts wasn't finished. He looked around at the mourners gathered by the gate, at the whispers that had turned into stunned silence. Then he raised his voice, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This funeral will not continue until Private Carter is seated with honor. He does not ask for permission. He has already earned it." The words hit like a thunderclap. The guards scrambled to open the gates. The crowd parted, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe. Some saluted Carter as he stepped forward. Others bowed their heads in respect. His frail frame moved slowly, but with each step, the weight of rejection seemed to fall away. General Roberts himself moved to Carter's side, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. The gesture was more than symbolic. It was a message. This man belonged here as much as anyone else. Perhaps even more. As they walked the gates together, Roberts leaned down slightly, his voice low but full of conviction. "He never forgot you, Carter. Not once. Every time he told us about that night, he said, 'If I survived, it was because of him.'" Tears welled in Carter's eyes. His cane shook under his grip, but not from weakness, from the overwhelming rush of emotions that no words could fully capture. "And I never forgot him," Carter whispered. "Not a day in my life." Inside the cemetery, the ceremony paused. Guests turned their heads as the sight of General Roberts escorting the frail old man toward the front row stole their attention. The band silenced their instruments. Even the chaplain at the podium lowered his book, sensing something extraordinary was taking place. Whispers rose again, but this time they were filled with reverence. "Who is he?" someone asked. "A comrade," another replied softly. "No." A third corrected, "A brother." As Carter approached the casket, the envelope in his trembling hand became the center of focus. He held it delicately, like it was more precious than gold. General Roberts announced to everyone present, "This is Private Samuel Carter, a soldier whose courage once stood beside the generals. Today, he fulfills a promise, and we honor him as we honor Marcus Hill." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of respect, of awe, of the realization that true honor is not written in ranks or medals alone, but in promises kept and sacrifices remembered. And with that, the ceremony was no longer just about the man in the casket. It was about the bond between two soldiers, one a general, the other a forgotten private, whose loyalty to each other had transcended decades, battles, and even death. The funeral had come to a halt, not out of disruption, but out of respect for something greater than protocol, the unbreakable brotherhood of war. The funeral had stopped, not because of chaos, not because of disruption, but because of respect. All eyes followed as General Roberts led Samuel Carter, the frail, forgotten private, past the gates that had so firmly rejected him only moments earlier. The murmurs of the crowd faded into silence, replaced by an almost sacred stillness. It was as though the very air understood the weight of what was happening. Carter's steps were slow and uneven, his cane tapping softly against the stone path, but each step carried more meaning than a parade of soldiers in perfect formation. The man who had nearly been turned away was now walking toward the heart of the ceremony, his presence commanding a respect no medal or title could have earned. Roberts kept a steady hand on his shoulder, a silent reassurance that he was no longer alone. Soldiers along the aisle instinctively straightened, their eyes following the elderly man with reverence. Some of them saluted, not because they were ordered to, but because they felt compelled. They knew, every soldier knows, that promises made on the battlefield are sacred, unbreakable bonds written in blood and sacrifice. At the front row, Carter was offered a seat among the highest-ranking officers and dignitaries. He hesitated at first, his old eyes scanning the polished metals and the sharp uniforms that gleamed under gray light. He looked down at himself, his faded coat, his trembling hands, his shoes worn thin from years of use. He didn't feel like he belonged among them. But Robert spoke firmly, leaving no room for doubt. "Private Carter, this seat has been waiting for you." The general would want nothing less. With a deep breath, Carter lowered himself into the chair, his cane resting across his lap. The crowd remained hushed, sensing the weight of the moment. Then, as though guided by something greater, Carter rose once more. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up, the cane wobbling under his grip. His knees shook, but his spirit held firm. He shuffled forward to the casket, his every step echoing in the silence of hundreds of witnesses. When he reached the flag-draped coffin, he paused. His hand trembled as he laid the faded envelope gently on top. For years, he had carried it, protected it, held it close as if it were his last connection to his fallen friend. And now, it had finally reached its rightful place. His voice cracked as he whispered, though the stillness made his words audible to all. "I kept my promise, Marcus." Tears spilled down his cheeks, carving paths through the wrinkles of his weathered face. He placed his palm flat against the flag for a long moment, closing his eyes as memories flooded back. The battlefield, the smoke, the shouting, the hand that pulled him from the mud, the voice that told him to keep fighting. "I wouldn't be here if not for you," he whispered again. "And I swore I'd be here when your time came. I never forgot, Marcus. Not one day." The crowd was transfixed. Many of the soldiers standing in formation struggled to maintain their composure, their eyes burning with unshed tears. Even hardened officers who had seen decades of service felt their throats tighten. General Roberts stepped forward and addressed the mourners. His voice rang out clear and strong. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we bury a general, a leader, a man whose name will live on in history. But let us not forget that behind every great general are the men who stood by him, who fought beside him, who carried his burden when it was too heavy to bear." He gestured toward Carter. Private Samuel Carter is one of those men. He does not wear stars on his shoulder, but he carries honor in his heart, and that is just as noble. A ripple of applause moved through the crowd, soft, respectful, but heartfelt. It was not the kind of applause meant for ceremony. It was the kind that came from the soul, the kind that acknowledged a truth too powerful to ignore. The chaplain returned to the podium, his voice quivering slightly as he continued. "We speak of duty, sacrifice, and loyalty. Today, we are shown a living example of all three." He looked at Carter directly. "Sir, you remind us that honor does not fade with time, nor does friendship end with death." The military band prepared for the final salute. Soldiers raised their rifles, the sharp clicks of their preparation echoing through the cemetery. The command rang out, and the rifles fired 3 volleys into the air, each shot cutting through the heavy silence like thunder. The sound reverberated in Carter's chest, pulling him back to memories of the battlefield. But this time it was not chaos. It was closure. Then came the haunting sound of the bugle playing taps. The slow, mournful notes drifted through the air, rising and falling like a final farewell. Carter's eyes filled again, but this time there was a peace in them. He stood as tall as his frail body allowed, his hand lifting in one final salute to his friend. Around him, every soldier mirrored the gesture. Hundreds of hands rose to their brows, a sea of salutes directed not just at the decorated general in the coffin, but at the forgotten private who had stood by his side. For a brief, shining moment, ranks and titles melted away. There were no generals, no privates, no officials or civilians. There were only brothers and sisters in arms, united in respect for a bond that even death could not sever. When the bugle's last note faded, silence returned once more. But it was no longer heavy with tension or sorrow. It was filled with something different, understanding. Every person present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would be told long after the funeral had ended. As Carter lowered his hand from the salute, Robert stepped beside him once again. "You've done more than keep a promise, Samuel," he said quietly, though many could hear. "You've reminded us all what loyalty truly means." Carter nodded, his tears still flowing freely. "I'm just a soldier," he whispered. Robert shook his head. "No, you're a brother." And with that, the ceremony came to its true close, not with the speeches or the music, but with fulfillment of a promise made decades ago in the mud and fire of war. As mourners began to leave, many approached Carter, shaking his hand, thanking him, some even embracing him. He had arrived at the gates as an outsider, refused entry and nearly forgotten. But he left the funeral not just as a guest of honor, but as living proof that true honor is not measured in stars or stripes, but in promises kept in friendships that last beyond the grave. And though General Marcus Hill was laid to rest that day, the memory of his bond with Private Samuel Carter would live on forever